welcome back to Poker Distilled, and we have some pretty bad news today, Melissa, unfortunately. Nothing out of the ordinary. This is what comes with the territory with poker, but you are not yourself today. You have had a dreadful weekend poker-wise. I can tell from your energy levels that you are suffering somewhat. I can feel it from you because I know you pretty well by this point. I can feel that you are not your normal sort of sprightly and enthusiastic self today. You've got something weighing on your mind. So today we're going to talk about when poker is like a literal fucking minefield, when it feels like you're going to get blown up at every opportunity, when every flop is just a what could go wrong this time type of dilemma. What's been going on? How are you feeling today? Talk to us.
I'm feeling like the equivalent of I just got hit by a train or something. I mean, maybe that's a little bit too much, but I definitely feel like I'm dragging weights around my ankles when I walk, that I have a kind of pressure weighing down on me after this weekend. And really it was Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So it was 3 full sessions that just went terribly. And the irony of the whole thing is that Saturday morning before this all started, I remember I had run fairly well the last 2 or 3 sessions, not amazing, but just consistently like fairly well, like winning maybe like a half buy-in or a buy-in each session. And then I remember thinking to myself, this is like, I've kind of figured this out. Like I've kind of figured out this poker thing. Like I'm not kidding. That's literally what was going through my head.
Yep.
And like, oh, if I just kind of play this way, like this is kind of a consistent way to kind of beat this game. And then the poker gods sent a lightning bolt down into my my poker game because I ran terribly for the next 3 sessions. And I think coming out of it now, it's Tuesday morning when we're recording this. I'm at the point where I feel like I've been like the floor has dropped out from underneath me, and I'm just like suddenly in like a trap door has dropped me into a pool of water or something, and I'm just like trying to kind of find my way out, or I'm in some kind of trap and I don't know which way is out, which way is up, and really starting to think, okay, like, was that a good line where I got stacked on that one hand? Did I play that ridiculously aggressive? Was I tilted in that one hand? All of these things are going through my mind to where I'm unable to even understand. I feel like in a weird way, I don't even like understand like how to play correctly. That sounds really dramatic, but
That's
that's
really
like,
common.
whatever. Yeah. So I'm glad that I can kind of talk about it a bit today with you, P, and I'm sure people listening will relate to this feeling where nothing you do works, where you see a flop and it seems like a minefield. It feels like what is going to hurt me next? Like how is this board going to run out in a way that's going to take more of my chips?
Yeah.
That's how it feels.
Yeah, there's a sense of inevitability about it, right? Because like if you're getting constantly fucked up by something in real life, like if you're in a minefield, for example, to take the most extreme example, then your body adjusts to the fact that you're in a minefield. Your brain adjusts to it. Every step you take is with immense trepidation, and for good reason, for the sense of your own survival. And in poker, obviously there's this disconnect, there's this alien world thing that I talk about in poker therapy, where the laws of physics in poker just don't follow the laws of physics in real life, right? When it comes to things like luck and patterns, and the brain's obviously struggling to wrap itself around the idea that sometimes it's just your job to be stacked 13 times across 3 days in a live game, which is a hell of a lot. I'm making up numbers. You have no idea, like, the extent of your downswing. But that is sort of unacceptable to the limbic system, right? And to the reptile brain, because they're kind of like, well, if we're in a situation where this is happening to us, then we must be in a minefield or a war zone, or we must be putting ourselves in some situation, and we must need to like really reevaluate our life and our understanding of what we're doing. So I think what's happening is that the brain is like way more complex than us armchair amateur psychologists can even begin to comprehend. And it's probably started some process, would be my guess, where it's kind of saying, you should question whether you know what you're doing, because this is too much pain to happen if you did know what you were doing. So there must be something deeply, deeply wrong. And even if you know logically that that's not the case, even if you can look back over those hands and for the majority, you're able to say, no, I played that fine. This was unfortunate. I ran into the top of their range there. That bluff is okay. It just didn't work out this time. Even if you're able to rationalize all of that, your subconscious could still be sending the kind of subtle droning message of, you're doing it wrong, you're making mistakes, you're no good, you need to fix it, otherwise you're going to perish and this is going to continue. So that alarm bell ringing sense of self inadequacy is louder and is always going to pierce through the bursts of rationality. They're going to feel extremely weak in times like this. So even if you do play a hand well and you come to accept that cognitively, that solace, if you can even use that word, it might be too strong a word, is going to be so short-lived and so fleeting and so like almost dumbed down in it. It's almost like your rationality becomes anesthetized by the brain's sort of subconscious shift, right? And it's just overpowering everything. And I know exactly what it feels like. I've taught loads of people that feel that way. And yeah, maybe you're going to be a bit of a zombie for a few days as you wrestle with this subconscious reaction to what's happened. Just never lose sight of the fact that you understand what you understand about the game, the feelings you've had, the winning sessions you've had, the success you've had. Always try and zoom out. You know, my friend and Carrot Corner coach, James, was it Akshar? I think it was Akshar actually that said this. He said something like, whenever he's feeling like he's going through a downswing or poker isn't going well in the short term, he looks at all the money he's ever made with pocket aces on his poker tracker, and he looks at all the like thousands upon thousands of dollars he's won with pocket aces, and he looks all the times he's stacked people, and he remembers when he goes through a list actually of why he loves playing the game. He actually said, Pete, I write down in like pen and paper the reasons for which I play poker and what it does for me, like how it excites me and like fuels me and gets my subconscious juices flowing. And I think right now it's your subconscious that's struggling, and it's your subconscious that's poisoning your conscious mind with its, you know, sort of inevitable reaction to this. I think the heavy weight that you describe is very much the brain's sort of shift towards making you question what the hell you're doing. And it might be good to appeal to the subconscious mind as to why you like poker and why you're good at it and why you feel like it's worthy and you're worthy to do it, you know, and do that in subconscious terms, not just conscious terms. So my advice to you today as you go through your day and get on with life would be, every time you're tempted to rationalize whether a play was good or bad, interrupt yourself. Save that for when you're feeling out of this funk. Don't do that yet. Just interrupt that and instead go down the path of imagining and remembering the good times. That means getting in touch with the good things that have happened in the past with poker, getting in touch with just the abstract relationship between you and poker in the present. Like, what is that? Just in the abstract, what is it you like about the game overall, independently as to how it's been going? And then what is it you hope for in your poker future, you know, and try and get in touch with all of those sides of it. And resist that temptation to fight subconscious weight and subconscious negativity and all those emotions with logic, because logic isn't going to do shit to those emotions and those mental states.
That's so helpful, and that appeal to rationality and that appeal to like some external validation of like what's going on here. It's like a life raft. So like when I got home last night, I literally spent like an hour with a solver just going through hands to be like, I played that correctly, right? Was that right? Yeah. Okay. I thought that was okay. I could do that. Yeah. Okay. Which is like so wrong and silly and like not taking into any consideration all the external factors, all the deviations, everything else, but just like so desperate for like something outside of yourself to give you like a reality check or some kind of validation. It's like, and that becomes especially desperate when you're like, at least in the situation I was in. And so like, yeah, that's one point. The other point that I liked, or that I kind of resonated with me, is this, like, when you play online, obviously you have like you have all the data that you can look at, like you're saying, like your friend that looks at all of the times he had aces and how much money he's won with aces. Like in a live, like the sessions I played this weekend, like 3 long live sessions, like yeah, I got aces a couple times. I think I even got quads once, which was really odd. I flopped quads right after I'd gotten stacked in the previous hand.
Wait, you
Um,
made quads and you still had a bad weekend? What's wrong with
yes,
you?
yes, I know. Isn't that freaking nuts? I remember thinking that to myself. I'm like, I had aces today. I had, and I got paid with aces. I had quads, but the other problem too is that in low stakes live environments, if you're not at the right table, and generally you are at the right table,
Hmm.
which makes live poker generally very profitable, a very profitable endeavor compared to online.
Mm.
But if you're not at the right table and you don't have the right players, and the table is overly tight and passive,
Hmm.
that is awful, because then you can get aces, then you can get quads, and then not get paid, or get in situations where, like in the hand I had quads, I had pocket sevens, under the gun +2, under the gun raised, I 3-bet, which is why a wide 3-bet pocket sevens under the gun +2, but I did it because under the gun one was a very amateur player, or is a very
I think
amateur
it's
player.
fine. I think like isolating bad
Yeah.
players with lighter three bets in position is
Yeah.
amazing. Like they don't four bet you enough. It's just
No,
a
no, nobody
spot you want to
forbets.
usually get involved. So I think it's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
Okay. See, that's what I mean though. I mean, my
You're
brain's so
doubting things
skewed as to like,
you
yeah,
normally do
yeah,
without giving it a
yeah,
second thought. Can you give me 1 second actually? I need
yeah,
to deal
yeah.
with the dogs because I left them outside. I just realized. 1 sec. So yeah, things that we normally do just suddenly become not so clear, not so safe anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, back to the
Yeah.
hand.
So I 3-bet, it was 3-bet pocket with pocket sevens. He called me, and then the flop was 7-7 queen, and check. The turn, check. I bet, I think I bet I B75 pot. He flat calls, and then the river he checks to me, and I like 4x pot, and he ended up calling me, and he shows pocket kings.
Hmm.
So it's like, it's a situation where, like, he just flats with pocket kings, and then he checks, and it's like he
Hmm.
just check calls, he just plays it passively. And what I mean, why I'm telling you all this, is because, like, if you get the wrong those types of players on a table, you just not like, the stars don't align, and it's really hard to get value from your value hands. And then if you stack on top of that running poorly in big pots, then what happens is you tend to kind of like, you get stuck, and it's just hard to make it up. And anyways, that's one factor that can sometimes affect like a live session. But the other part of it is that when I'm thinking about it now, I don't have a database to go through and look at all the hands. All I have is what sticks out in my brain, which tends to be the hands that went poorly. So I don't remember necessarily the hands that I may have played well, or where I, encountered a kind of fortune reversal type spot, and, made a brave fold and reacted kind of with discipline.
Hmm.
Those don't stick out. What sticks out is the big pots where I lose a lot. And so it's hard in your brain, for your brain to process, like, that part of like, okay, what do I like about poker?
Hmm.
What is this giving me that is really,
Yeah.
is really positive?
So it could be then that you're not quite capable of doing that yet, that this weight is too much.
Mhm.
And it could be that just doing nothing is the right way to go. It could just be that like taking 2 days where you don't think about poker,
Yeah.
and you will miss it by the end of 2 days. I know what you're like with poker. I know how crazy you are about the
Oh
game. I
yeah.
really feel like 2 days into this, if you tried this, you would already really miss the game, and you'd be ready to get back there, and you would have a lot more enthusiasm and curiosity and all of those good things that are incompatible with the state of kind of frozen fear, or like disheartened kind of zombie mode where you're just trudging through life like, oh god, is this big burdensome weight on top of me. So it could be that you need to just like basically take yourself out of that space. Like if you're just if thinking about poker right now to you is going to mean just reliving all of the horrors of the weekend and reliving all of the pots that you lost. I mean, you've already sat there with a solver, and I agree it wasn't the optimal thing for you to do. Like, but we act in, when we're
Mhm.
stressed, we act in really automatic ways, or compulsive ways, moreover, that we can't really control. So who cares? Like, okay, it wasn't the optimal response, but who has the optimal response when they're like up to here with stress? Not many people. So don't beat yourself up over that. But maybe now that that's turned into less of a kind of panic mode and more of like a just a horrible wait, it might be time to just give yourself a couple of days to get into the right emotional mental state again, get rest, get some sleep. You know, he said to me that you've not really slept well last night because you've been playing late and then all of this has been on your mind, so no wonder you've not slept. But yeah, just look after yourself, like TLC from you to you for like a few days, and then come back to the game again and then start thinking, okay, what is it I like about this game? What is it I love about this game? If you take the metaphor of an abusive relationship, right, which is actually like the relationship a lot of people have with this game, let's face it. When that person gets back with their abuser, right, and I'm not saying poker's your abuser, but I think it's analogous in some ways, so bear with me. So when that person leaves the house and says never again and storms out and gets in their car and packs up their stuff and leaves that person that's being physically or emotionally abusive to them, and then they come back 3 days later, right? When they come back, what are they thinking about? What kind of things is on their mind, do you think?
When they come back from...
Yeah, like 2 or 3 days later, what kind of mental state are they in at that point? What kind of light are they perceiving that partner in?
But, probably a better light than they were when they left.
So they're probably seeing glass...
Return to normal.
Yeah, or like glass half full, like all these good times and all of that, and they're really wanting it to work, right? But if you said to them, go back and make this work like an hour after that, that would be ridiculous. It'd be completely incompatible. Now, I don't think you should stay with someone that abuses you emotionally or physically. I don't. I think that this is like not an analogy in the sense that, you know, I'm not saying, you know, get back with horribly abusive people in most cases. I think that's awful and you should leave them. But poker creates the illusion of being this abusive, horrible thing that torments you. And maybe it does torment you, but with poker, because it's not a person, it's not acting unethically, it doesn't know what your feelings are. That's where the analogy breaks down. But you could still have one part of this analogy being good with the other part being like a different thing. So even though there's no morality between you and poker here, where poker has like violated your rights ethically, you might still not be able to go back to it when you have just suffered a ton of abuse from it. So you might be in the phase right now where you've taken the 2 days away, you've gone back to stay with family or friends away from poker, and maybe it is right that you get back with poker because poker's not a psychopathic abuser or a violent partner or anything like that. Poker's just an object. It's a game, right? But maybe you need the space that a victim of that kind of abuse would need in order to even engage or think about that person again. So I wonder if like you are just reeling right now. You're just absolutely in the phase where the wounds that's inflicted on you this weekend are so huge that you do need to just get the hell away from it for a couple of days. And then when you come back, you need to make sure that you're in a space where when you start thinking about those hands, you are able to actually say, oh man, here's the things I love about this game. These are the aspects of this game that I actually like and I fell in love with and I want to spend my life with. Maybe that's what you need to do. Because right now, I do agree, like today, if you just keep doing this today, I think you're just going to go round in circles. And I don't think this is the time to try and rationalize, did I play well with sevens? Did I play well with jacks or anything like that? I think it's time to look after yourself first. And that's what I say to all of my students, by the way. If they have a bad session, then my advice is generally, okay, let's analyze it. Let's get back on the horse. Let's access all of the curiosity and the love of the game and look at all the times you won pots and think about what you want out of poker in the future. Let's recharge your batteries, as it were. Let's get your inspiration going. But when that is such a bad downswing that they're actually hurt and they're like a wounded animal, then I will agree with them when they say I need a few days away from the game. I'll say that's good. Okay, you're probably worried about being the sort of person that goes away and retreats from things and doesn't face a challenge. I know you're someone that faces challenges head on. But sometimes part of actually winning a battle is knowing when to temporarily retreat. And it might be the case that today we temporarily retreat, and then in a couple of days we start learning to fall in love with the game again and seeing all of the hope and the aspiration that we have and getting our ignition going. And then on day 3 or 4, it might be time to start rationalizing and fully taking accountability for any bad play. I don't think you're in a frame of mind today where you can bear the burden of taking accountability for bad play. Therefore, don't analyze your hands, because some of them will be bad. You know, that's the tough love approach.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think too, there's a temptation with me to minimize the downswing itself and its effect on me. So like, there's like, I want to be someone who can weather, you know, the ups and downs of the game, and who can access my A game even when things aren't going well. I feel like that's kind of a crucial part of being a good player. And so there's this need in me to want to minimize what's happening and say, just kind of get back on the horse and continue on forward, and you'll find your way out of this. And really, that's the same part of me that says, well, the longer you sit at the table, the better it is, because eventually the money's going to come your way. And so by sitting out, by not playing for a day or two, this is just what my mind's telling me, is that it feels like I'm saying, I've been so affected by what is a normal part of the game.
It's not normal, though, in the sense that it happens all the time. It's really abnormal statistically for you to drop as much as you have this one weekend and suffer all of those beats. So I just quickly point that out, that it's not normal. You know, in the short term, you wouldn't expect that to happen very often.
Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense, because it's like the way that my lizard brain, whatever you want to call it, is like telling me to kind of like just get back in the ring kind of thing. And then on top of that, you know, I have like, well, I want to be able to kind of put myself into like difficult situations sometimes to see how I do.
Okay. Yeah.
And so like, it's really this, I guess the equivalent would be like someone that's like, I don't know, like an ultra marathoner or something, where they're just like, well, I run marathons all the time, like 26 miles is like not a big deal. What I really want to do is I want to do one of those like 3-day ultra marathons where you run like 200 miles and put myself in a situation where I'm just like tested. There's a part of me that wants to do that. And I don't know if that's healthy or not. And I don't know if it's at all appropriate for poker. It's probably not. I'm thinking it's probably not. But like, there's a part of me that's just like, can I, like, what's the most, not the most extreme thing, but like, I want to put myself sometimes into a difficult situation rather than walk away from it. Yeah. And I'm not saying any of that is appropriate right now, but that's sometimes where my head goes with it.
All right. 2 points here. First, I want to play devil's advocate, and I want to challenge a couple of things you said there. And then secondly, I want to give you a boxing analogy, so don't let me forget to do the boxing analogy if I get swept up in the first part. How difficult would it be for you to walk away? Because the reason I ask this is, I think it would be more natural for you as a person with your personality to get back in the ring immediately and face that challenge. I think that would gel better with like your ego and your self-image between your relationship that you have between, or you perceive that you have with poker, compared with if you said, I am going to take 2 days off. I feel like the latter, I might be totally wrong, and I hope you'll tell me if I am, but I feel like the latter might even be more intimidating to you in some way. And although you're framing this as, I want to put myself in a tough situation by going back to poker, I have a sneaking suspicion that that's the easier route for you to take from a deliberative standpoint.
I think that's a really interesting concept, and I like the idea of me switching around the challenge in a way that's the opposite. I don't know if that's true, but I like it, if that makes sense. I really like it, but I don't know if it's true.
I don't know if it's true,
to be honest. Yeah.
Like if you were to, okay, so then put it this way. Let's do the boxing analogy, then we'll come back to that then, right? So let's say that there's two boxers, they're in a fight, and boxer A gets knocked down by boxer B, right? Gets sent to the floor with like a really, really clean hit and is like on the deck. Ultimately, it transpires that boxer A wins that fight, right? The one that got knocked down. What does the timeline of events look like between boxer A being on the canvas, sparkled, head looking up at the lights, and his hand being raised up by the by the judges, umpires, referee at the end of the fight? What does that timeline look like, and what kind of stages of that timeline are essential?
Between when boxer A gets knocked out and when the referee lifts up the winner, the
boxer A wins the fight ultimately, right? So
okay,
by the end of, like, let's say boxer A gets knocked out in like the third round, but not like knocked out, just knocked down, right? That's
oh,
a count.
okay.
One.
I thought that's
So
what was confusing me.
he's
I
not
thought, like,
knocked
a knockout
out.
is
No,
okay.
he's knocked down, right? But maybe he is like hit so hard that he loses consciousness for a couple
but
of
he's
seconds.
knocked down. It's not like a he lost the fight.
Right, they don't stop the fight, but ultimately boxer A, that same one, wins the fight. What does that timeline of events look like, and how does it begin?
With him getting up.
And what does that look like? Break that down into more stages for me. You say getting up, but what stages are involved in getting up? What kinds of things happen?
Well, I mean, he is. I don't know. I'm not sure I follow. I mean, I guess he would just physically lift himself off
immediately,
the mat,
like
right?
he's just like down, and then he's like hurt by this punch, then suddenly he's just on his feet and he's normal, or what does it look like?
No, it would require like refocusing, the kind of like catching his breath, maybe like dabbing the blood away.
Yeah, like getting his vision back, catching his breath, waiting for pain to subside, steadying his balance. Maybe the end of the round comes and he's able to recuperate a lot during the interval between round 4 and round 5. Maybe the start of round 5 he takes it a bit easier, and then by round 6 he's like truly back in the fight, like back to the way he was before the knockdown. So that getting up there that boxer A goes through, if you break that down into even more like micro stages, there's probably a stage where he looks like he's not going to get up, right? There's probably a stage where he looks like really fucked. You're like, wow, this guy is like, he's done. But then like he slowly, 5, 6, 7, slowly gets to his feet. The ref's like 8, 9, he's staring him in the eyes. He's kind of blurry at first, but then he makes eye contact with the ref. The ref's like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. Then the second time he's more convincing. He's like, yeah, I am. I'm okay. Then he staggers over to his corner, dabs some blood. When he walks back to the ring, he's a bit steadier on his feet than he was before. The round resumes. He barely makes it through the round alive because he's still fucked. But then he starts to recuperate through the rest of the fight. So when you say he just gets up, I think that is like so indicative of the way that you're seeing what you should do right now, because getting up is not just one fell swoop. So what if part of getting up is not playing today? What if part of getting up is those 3 seconds where boxer A is just on the ground, slowly regaining consciousness and beginning to move his limbs again? What if that is today? What if tomorrow is standing up, and what if the next day is is the bell sounding and getting back in the fight?
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's also that I'm super zoomed in right now, and I look at it like my recovery, that kind of getting back up and that whole process that you just described has to take place in a matter of hours or something like that. Or like, it's like, no, it can take a couple days.
Yeah, that's not a disaster long term. A couple of days is not a long term. So I'll put it this way. What if boxer A gets up so quickly, doesn't even like get his bearings, doesn't get his balance back, doesn't catch his breath, just jumps right back up to his feet, then falls over straight away again? What does the ref do when he sees that?
Well, then it's over.
Stops the fight. He's like, no, you're not continuing. You just like got up and fell over right away. You're not continuing. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
So the ref's like, that's fucking, this guy's not in his right mind. He just like tried to spring back to his feet and fell down on his ass again. Like, no way is this continuing. So here's another point of view, right? And I am strongly playing devil's advocate here for the point of view of you not playing today, but it's totally your decision. But I want to put it to you another way as well. If you play today and you run bad and you play bad and you drop some more buy-ins, how are you going to feel tonight?
Worse than I felt last night, probably.
And how does that, is that something you're willing to feel? Are you okay feeling like that?
I guess I'm okay. It's not like I would prefer not to feel like that if I had a choice, for sure.
So I would put it to you that, like, if you play today, in some sense, poker is now deciding, variance is now deciding, like, you're pretty cut up about it today, right? Like, you're definitely not yourself today. You need a bit of time to recover. Fair enough. You go out and play today to quote unquote put yourself in that stressful situation again and thrive and come through it. I feel like we're relinquishing control a bit to poker. I feel like we're saying to poker,
Yeah.
okay, well, if you look after me today and I play well and run good, and these are both separate variables, although they are interconnected, then I'm going to
Right.
feel way better, and I'm going to feel like some damage is repaired. And that's really tempting. That's like something I would be craving as well in your shoes. I'd really
Yeah.
want that. But then poker is ultimately kind of deciding whether you feel like absolute shit in 12 hours time or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And I feel there's
Yeah.
something in me personally where I'd be like, okay, if a person or thing is able to determine that I feel unacceptably bad later, I'm not doing that thing and I'm not going to see that person. I'm not spending any more
Yeah.
time with that person. Like I
Yeah.
have a boundary and I have a limit. So it's up to you to decide, I guess, whether going to play today and it going badly crosses that limit of what you're able to put yourself through. So I think as long as
Yeah.
if you can make the decision and say, I am ready to get back on the horse, like I have already stood up and I'm already, you know, I've got my balance and I can see clearly and I've caught my breath. If you're
Mhm.
already feeling all of those things, and if it goes badly today, yeah, it's going to feel like shit, but it's not unacceptable. It's not untenable. Like you can live with it, and you can live with it in a sense where you're like, well, I signed up for this and therefore I'm actually in some sense okay with it. Then yeah, go and play. But if it's going to be more like poker will decide ultimately whether I heal or get even more severely wounded, I don't think that's the appropriate situation. At least for me, it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
mainly kind of just poking and prodding here a little bit
Yeah.
to see what you think about that.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think the risk that I see to myself is not so much, I mean, there's the emotional part of it and feeling crappy and all of
Mm.
that, and maybe having another night of like less than ideal sleep
Mm.
and all of those other like, yeah, there are like physical health effects, things like that. But I think also too, like, I don't know if I can play well in the sense that
Yep.
like processing, like my processing function is not optimal. And a lot of what I'm feeling, like the emotions I feel kick in and I get like I'm very vulnerable to attachment right now. So like
Mhm.
if I were to go sit down in the card room, in a couple hours, and let's say that, I stack someone and I'm up, like a buy-in,
Mm.
like right away. I'm going to be, and then maybe the next hand, it's like a big hand. There's going to be a part of me that does not want to lose that stack.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be so attached to that stack because that's going to tell me this is your key. This is the first rung on the ladder of pulling yourself out of this downswing.
Yeah.
This is like the route to escaping from this,
Yeah.
This underground layer that you've been trapped in. And I'm going to totally misinterpret what is going on, and everything's going to be viewed through the lens of the last 3 sessions, and it's not going to be independent. I'm not going to be able to think independently. I'm not going to be able to think in terms of what's the highest DV, because I'm going to be so affected by my current status and how it relates to my previous sessions.
Mm.
So that's the risk that I see being the biggest reason why I would not want to play today, because I don't want to go in there thinking like that. I have to be willing to be down again 3 buy-ins at the end of the session. I just have to.
Yep.
So until I regain that sense of normalcy, if you will, before I kind of, where I can go into a session and be like, yeah, okay, I'm down 3 buy-ins, but I'm still going to make this really tough call on the river or something like that. Or I'm up 3 buy-ins and I'm going to make this fold or whatever. And so that's really the part that I think is most at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're going to go in there and you're going to need things to be a certain way in order to feel okay, you're going to, like, certain situations are going to feel totally unacceptable to you. That's a very good sign that you're not quite yet at the point where you should be back in the ring. And getting up, this idea of like getting up after being knocked down, it really is a process. And I'd say that some of the best poker players I know will take a week off when things aren't going very well for them. Like one guy I know in particular who's a really strong player will take a month off when he's had a really bad time, and he'll set up his year in a way where if poker is kicking him in the nuts repeatedly, he'll happily take a month off and say, well, I knew at some point this year this was likely going to happen, and now I need a month away from this fucking game. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you should do that. I don't think that's right for you. I think you're someone that gets up way more quickly than that and does get back on the horse, but there's still a process to getting back on the horse. And yeah, if you're going to sit there today and you know that you're very likely to play your C game or your D game, you have to ask, well, what is actually the point? You're delaying your recovery, and you're also putting yourself in a situation where variance is kind of determining your fate. And that's always the case in some sense in poker, but it shouldn't carry over to, you know, what's acceptable to you, what's an emotional state that you can bear and what's not. Like, I think that's where you need to say, okay, you know, things change quite quickly. Humans are really resilient. Like, give us a couple of days after something bad happens. We're usually way better 2 days after than we are like when it first happens, right? That's typically how we are. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think you could get a lot out of that. And I want to just assure you that 2 days off or something, that's a very short amount of time for a poker player to take off on average when they're going through the blender. Most people I know take longer than that and are still successful and have good careers within poker.
That's good to know. That's the other thing I think about is that, you know, should this be something that I just play through as a kind of part of, like I said earlier, part of the game, and like I just have to kind of roll with it. It's like if you're, you know, if you're any kind of an athlete and you get knocked down and you say, okay, I have to now take 3 months off, when it's like, okay, you had a minor scratch, like you're not,
that's bad.
like, is this a minor scratch? It's not. It's deeper than that. It's definitely an injury, I would say.
Yeah.
It feels like an injury. It feels like it's a debilitating. You put that on top of, you know, lack of sleep and everything that is also affecting my thought process and my mood, and I feel like just, you know, treating myself as I would someone who has just gone through, you know, a very difficult situation. Like, you're not going to be like, okay, like you've just experienced like some kind of trauma, so now like get right back on the horse, get right back into it. Like, you would never do that to a friend. You would never, or a loved one. You would say, take time. You need time to recover. And I think putting into that context is a lot more helpful to me, rather than to kind of think, well, this is just a part of the game. I mean, it is a part of the game, but I think not minimizing the wound and the injury.
No, absolutely. And I think like taking 2 days off when you've been running that badly and when you've had like a really dire stint of variance is not very long to take off. I feel like it is in a sense just getting back up. I think the 2 days is just part of getting back up, but we have to start putting it into perspective. Like, I agree that, you know, if you're worried that taking 3 months off would be highly inappropriate and damaging to your livelihood and longevity as a poker player, I would agree with you. That would be an absurd reaction to this. Taking 3 months off because of this would probably mean that you weren't cut out for the game and you should go and do something else if you felt you had to. Other stuff aside, obviously, if you were going through other stuff in your life or mental health, it might be different. But if your normal reaction to like a severe downswing is to stop playing for months, that's really bad. Like, you probably will never make it in poker. That's not acceptable. But yeah, I mean, you have days off from poker even when you're not running bad. You don't have to play every day when you're running fine. So you can certainly allocate your days off to days where you would underperform and where you know that you need a bit of time to recuperate. So that's on the topic of taking time off. That's something that, you know, we can say more on, or you can just sort of make the decision on it. But there's other aspects of this as well that we could talk about. So I don't know if you want to move on from that part, or if you've got like some summarizing things to say, or whether we just move on.
No, I think we can move on. I think that was helpful.
Okay.
With regards to the time off.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what happens to our game when we're running bad, like how we're likely to feel at the table. Let's return to something we talked about a few weeks ago, which was about poker biases. So how during this downswing and this sort of weekend of running terribly, have your biases towards aggression re-emerged? Because I said something pretty blunt to you, like before we started recording the call, where I said like I didn't actually like you and I didn't want to do this podcast anymore. But no, that's not. I'm just kidding. What I said was, I said to you, Melissa, you are a player whose tilt is aggression. Aggression is your tilt. Like when you are playing your F game, or your E game, or your D game, or your C game, when you're not playing optimally, you tend to raise in spots where calling would have been better, or bet in spots where checking would have been better. Has
Yeah.
that reared its head again? And if so, how? And what are you going to do over the coming weeks to get that in check? If so.
Yeah. It has come up, but it has not come up as dramatically as it did 6 months ago. I think it's come up, but it's not like completely, I'm not completely free of this bias, but I'm certainly aware of it. And it's not as, it doesn't affect me as much as it did before.
Yep.
But I will say that um, when it does come up in specific spots, um, it is I do feel like it sometimes is my default.
Yep.
Because I feel like there's a part of me that I just instinctively feel like most players in my pool don't want to get into big pots and also are not used to it. Like it's a really foreign world when I four bet them pre. It's a really foreign world when I'm, over betting turn and river or something like that. And so there's my bias is I want to put them in that world a lot. And then because I want to put them in that world, I react accordingly. And then when it goes wrong, it's quite dramatic because the pot's so big that I've made big. And so I think that has definitely come up, but it doesn't come up so much in the way that it used to, in the sense that before it would come up because I would get too committed to the pot,
right,
to the chips in the middle. I would feel an almost emotional attachment. Like I need to drag that my way. Now it's more about, well, I just want to outplay this person in a spot that is a lot of, it's like a high pressure spot or a high stress spot. Like I want to get into that world with them and I want to outplay them. And so there's a bit of ego, there's a bit of my natural competitive spirit, and I don't think it's all unhealthy, to be honest with you.
It's not.
I think
it's all a lot of it's healthy. Yep.
But that's definitely my bias when I feel like variance is kicking me over and over again. I think, well, then screw variance. Like I'll do my own thing.
Yeah. So that might be the unhealthy part, right? That part
Yeah,
there. But I do think, like, generally,
exactly.
the fact that you do that, the fact that you're like, oh, you don't like playing for like $950 in a 4-bet pot. Guess what? You're gonna have to, buddy, because I'm gonna take you into that deep dark forest where 2 + 2 = 5. And we could go on with the McAltal quote, but you get the picture. I love that about your game. I think it's a real edge, and a lot of poker players are lacking that killer instinct, that cutting edge thing where you're like, well, maybe this will be high variance to me and there's some risk and sometimes I'll get stacked doing it, but I know that you are going to crumble way more than I am if we go into this landscape, so let's go. I love that about your game, and I think it's really important to separate here the good parts of this that are healthy from the bad parts that are unhealthy. So this bit about I'm going to make my own variant, I think this is the root of it. Let's explore that a bit further. So what does that look like in the context of how it would manifest in a hand of poker, and then like why is that so harmful?
Well, I think maybe I can talk about that pocket jacks hand I told you about, where like, okay, so I'm in small blind with pocket jacks. It's a relatively passive table, but there's 2 pros at my table who are generally play like very kind of tight reggy poker. And it limps to me. So I raise out of the small blind. I actually raised to 10. So it would be like I raised 5 big blinds instead of 3. And so which is standard. And then hijack, which is one of these pro regs, 3 bets me. And it was a limp 3 bet. And that's normally in like a lot. I don't know if this would ever happen online, but like in a live setting, especially at low stakes live, this is generally like a sign of like a strong hand. So they do this as a kind of tricky, trappy kind of thing. I find it completely obnoxious, and I would never engage in this kind of I think it's an embarrassing play. But anyways,
That's so
people
funny.
do it.
Let me ask one thing. So when you say reg, I think a lot of listeners right now are thinking regs don't do that. So I think this depends on your definition of reg and their definition of reg, right? So maybe when we say reg, we mean relative to the punters, like to the fish, they're better players, but they're certainly not like a studied online solver using reg or anything like that, right?
No, this is your I would say typical live 1-2 mid stakes between like 1-2 to 5-10 player who has who is generally like pretty well rolled for the game, has been around a lot, et cetera, but has like a lot of those live tricky trappy kind of tendencies, um that would never be something that like you would ever see a solver do or something. And so the um so yeah, so 3-bet out of the hijack, and so then I'm sitting there with pocket jacks, and like I think this is, in theory, this is a mix. I think probably more of a call than a raise. And so my instinct immediately is to, that was with 3 to 4-bet. And I think had I not been in a kind of, if I had been thinking clearly, I think I call here.
Yeah.
100% of the time.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but very high.
Well, I would
90%
say
maybe.
100%. I mean, don't mix in 10% of what you think is probably an inferior play, right? So I get what you're
I
saying.
don't know
Like,
if it would be an inferior play against all players. I really don't. I think that this is, I mean, out of the small blind, I don't know. Despite the fact that he limped raised, it's not 100% certain that that's always strong. It
it
just
doesn't
tends
have
to
to
be
be.
strong.
It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be. So if
Yeah.
you open jacks under the gun in 6 max cash, right? If I retreat into my
Yeah.
own fort here that I know better,
Yep.
and you get 3-bet by the small blind, you're never
Yeah.
meant to 4-bet, right? If you get 3-bet by the button and you're full ring, like jacks in really early position against like a button 3-bet, and
Uh-huh.
it's like 112 big blinds deep or something, you're probably, I don't know this for a fact, I've not studied full ring ranges, but you're probably never meant to 4-bet, right? The spots where you're not meant to 4-bet jacks pre because the range you're up against in theory is too strong for you to be able
Yeah.
to push enough equity to be able to do it for value, and then you don't want to be doing it as a kind of 4-bet fold line or 4-bet bluff line either, although pre-flop is kind of murky between bluffing and value betting, right, with equities running closer together, but that's neither here nor there. So in principle, there are spots where jacks is weak enough that it's just a pure call against the 3-bet in game theory. Now, if we're going to posit that limp raising strategies are generally way too strong, like they're underbluffed and they're stronger than normal 3-bets, and I think you would accept that, right? That a limp 3-bet is stronger than a normal 3-bet. Then it seems really likely to me that we're just in a world where we call 100% now. In theory, if Theory knew his range, Theory would probably tell you to only call. So it's not the case that he needs to never be bluffing or that he needs to have like a known 100% just really strong range for this to be the case. We just need to think it's more likely than not that jacks would become a pure call against this average range in order to pure call jacks, right? So one way I would get you to like fight back against your aggressive impulses would be to say, is this actually a mix? So before we start with the premise of, given it's a mix, I'm going to do this because I feel like it in this moment or because of X, Y, and Z things that I can justify it with, maybe it's not a mix to start with. You know, a lot of the aggressive plays you're making are probably not a mix, but you're starting from the premise that they are theoretically a mix. And I think that's where we need to say, to hell with mixing, to hell with the idea of accepting that because we're indifferent in a sim, we're indifferent in reality. Poker would be a really sad, boring game, right? If we were just indifferent in reality in like all of these spots where the solver says we are, that would suck. So let's get some curiosity back. Let's get this passion into your game for choosing a play because it's better than the other play. Let's make that our mission so that next time we're in a spot like this, we can say, when we're playing our A game, I appreciate it's not easy to do when you're, getting absolutely smashed by the deck. But next time you're playing your A or B game, let's say, okay, if one play was to be better than the other here, which one would it be? And now let me take that line 100% of the time right now. Let me just only take that line. I think that would really help.
I think that's really helpful. And I think baked into this aggression bias is a kind of, I don't want to call it like a solver bias, but like a reliance on, like, in my mind, I literally see that little square that has like the color, like, like half of it is red
half
or whatever.
Salmon, half green. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I see that in my mind. And I'm like, okay, this is what I can do here. But I think you're absolutely right. And the bias that comes in, the way it manifests itself is that I then 4-bet and get jammed on. And I'm in a spot now where I have jacks, and I think we were at 400 big blinds deep, maybe even more. He might have had more than me. We're just like ridiculously deep, in a cash game, and
Yeah.
it's like, it's just a stupid spot to be in. What it does is it creates problems that I didn't need to create, and it
Mm.
makes life more difficult for me when it happens, like it did. And so like
Yeah.
that's the way that the bias manifests itself.
Yeah, okay. So at the time then, when you choose the aggressive action, so we've talked about the first premise of, is this actually indifferent theoretically? Like, if theory knew my opponent's range, would it really tell me that I could 4-bet here? The second question that we can move on to now would be, well, why did you choose to 4-bet? Like, what was the actual, we call this pseudo logic in poker therapy, right? Like the kind of thought that poses under the guise of a GTO thought or rational thought, but in reality is like type 2 thinking we've outlined in this podcast many times now. Type 1, type 2, and type 3 thinking, right? And type 2 being the unwanted desire or fear-based thought process that really craves to bring about a certain outcome immediately, even at the expense of like objective EV as it occurs in the whole game tree. So what is the pseudo-logical thing that you say to yourself there that makes you just decide to 4-bet in that moment? Because I would put it to you that when you decide to 4-bet, if you're not looking at the second hand on your watch or looking at your suits or rolling some dice secretly behind your cards, you are in fact taking a pure action. So I'd put it to you that when you 4-bet, you're not mixing. You can say, well, I would call here sometimes, but in that moment, I don't think you're ever calling because you didn't do any randomization and you ended up raising. So I'd put it to you that you were pure raising. So what was the thought that got you to pure raise that hand in that spot when in fact it's probably a pure call? So let's go to that. Is there a culprit thought that we can pin down such that if it comes up in future, we can sort of see it again and catch it in the act?
I think part of it was player dependent. I felt like, I don't know, I'm not sure if this was correct or not, but my thought process was like, well, I want to, I'm uncapped here. If I 4-bet, and then I want to go into a 4-bet pot if he flats uncapped,
Yep.
out of position. And then I also felt like, I just thought it was likely that if he jammed, I felt like it was probably a low chance that he would jam. And I know that that's not consistent with my earlier analysis of the limp raise.
Sure, but we're just recalling what went on in your head at the time.
Yeah, but that's what went through. That's what went through my mind. So I felt like, yeah. But I also felt like, well, there's some times where I can call here, and there's sometimes when I can raise, and this is a time when I want to raise for these reasons, like which we already went through.
Yeah, and then the thing with that is that the reasons that you specify, I think the second one about like if that was true that you're not going to get jammed on often, that would make sense in that context. I think we can reject that premise now and say, well, actually, if we think the range is really strong, we'd get jammed on at higher frequency.
Right.
But then the second one about like, I want to play a 4-bet pot, I'm uncapped, that seems like the kind of logic that we could use in any situation. I could open the button with 8 deuce off and say, I'm uncapped, I want to play a pot. So those two thoughts, I think they could be applied to any situation to justify something. Therefore, they can't even be close to sufficient for anything. So I'm not bringing that up to give you a hard time about the technical poker thoughts you had. What I'm trying to do here is focus in on the thoughts that you frequently have when this bias rears its head and when it causes you to make mistakes, so that next time they ring a bell, right? So that the next time you say something like, I really want to play X size of pot with this player right now, you can say, okay, but that's not sufficient, and I better go back and really make sure that this is indeed optional before I go ahead and do that, because it's not like that's not a particularly strong factor if we might be wrong about whether it's even an option in the first place, right? So these are sort of alarm bell ringing things that might be symptoms. You might say, well, okay, I have diabetes, right? I don't have diabetes, but let's say I did, right? There's probably certain symptoms that diabetics get that let them know that their insulin is low and they need to, like, take the insulin injection or whatever, or there's probably warning signs and red flags, right, for a diabetic. Same with someone with asthma or something like that. There's warning signs when you're having an asthma attack. If you're having a aggro bias attack, there are probably rashes
Yeah.
and sniffles and coughs and things that go along with it. What are they? Like, let's treat this like it's a medical condition. And that means that when you're playing your A game and you come back to poker again, you can maybe catch these at the original sign of the symptoms appearing, and yeah, go even further on the path to eliminating them. I think at least this culprit thought analysis is so good, because once you've exposed the thought as a culprit thought, you've done it in the cold light of day, and moreover, you've done it in front of the thousands of people that are going to listen to this on Spotify, right? That you're actually going to be able to have that resonate with you more in future. So definitely always like write out, guys watching this at home or listening, your culprit thoughts at the time when you make a play. Don't just jump to, oh man, I always do that, the stupid desire made me do it. There will actually be some like pseudo logical excuse that's going on usually, and if you can figure out what that is, next time your brain goes into that crafty conniving mode where it tries to make you do something to justify a desire, you catch it in the act, because you're like, aha, not this time, buddy. That's the thought that leads me down this erroneous path. So it's worth doing. But yeah, maybe you take a couple of days, and then it's time to go into all of those hands and do that sort of thing as honestly and objectively as you can. It still might not be the right thing to do it now, even though we are having this discussion.
Yeah. I think what's really helpful for me, which I don't do enough, and when things are going well, I don't do, but I think when things are going poorly, it would help, is just to write out my thought process. Like, even if I'm not going to share it with anyone, just for my own benefit, because a lot of times that thought process at the time feels like the most clear, rational kind of process in the world. But when you look back at it, you can see all the holes in it. You can see, okay, this was faulty. This was insufficient. A doesn't necessarily equal B. You know, this doesn't fit together. It's kind of just a jumble of different puzzle pieces, where at the time you thought you saw a totally complete picture. And I think one of the ways that poker tricks you, and one of the ways, you know, kind of being tilted or running bad tilts you, is that I think it causes you to see like a rationality and completeness where there's really only scattered pieces. And it's hard to do in the moment, especially if you only have a couple of seconds to think through something, to kind of step back and be like, okay, this is not a rational thought process. It is a thought process, but it's not rational. It's not connected. It's jumbled and it's insufficient. And I need to kind of recognize that and step back. And I think I can do that sometimes, but other times I can't. And then when you bake into it the bias, when you overlay it with this bias of aggression, it's kind of a bad combination.
Have you seen the movie Inception?
I have.
Do you remember when he was like down in the depths of like the dream state? There'd be like a spinning top or something that you would look at that would kind of bring him out of it. Really good movie, by the way. I'm like the guy that hasn't seen. Apparently it's
like the only movie you've ever seen.
It's the only movie I've ever seen. Yeah, I haven't seen. Apparently it's called The Terminator. It's not just Terminator. I was on Twitter.
Oh my God.
I was saying to this guy, look, I'm the guy that's not seen Terminator, and and he said, you mean you've not seen The Terminator? And I was like, okay, yeah, that speaks for itself, you know. But anyway, like one of the biggest points here is probably just this idea that you might need a little trigger to bring you out of that, right? Like maybe there is a spinning top equivalent. Like maybe if you catch yourself saying, I want to play the 4-bet pot, or I'm uncapped here, like whatever those things are, they might be enough to sort of wake you up and bring you out of that trance like jumbled state. And maybe that doesn't give you full clarity. Maybe it's not like, oh wow, suddenly I'm back in the real world. But at least it gives you a sense that something is wrong, and you should be very careful about acting on this thought process that you're having right now. And you should go back and double check your working, so to speak, now that you've woken up from the inception.
Yeah, I like the idea of going back and double checking your work. Like if you've ever like written an email in any kind of a professional context, it's like you want to make sure that you're not, you know, that you don't have errors in that email.
Well, seriously,
that kind of thing.
My accountant, one of them is called Georgia. And my brain got into the habit of writing like Geroja, like it misordered like two of the letters in the name. And I must have written this woman like 12 emails where I just called her like Garogia. And I know that's not a name, but like once you start doing something once, even if it's like totally erroneous and you don't catch it, it becomes normalized, right? And I was having this conversation with a student this morning where he was saying, I have these thoughts that like go back to 2006. Like I'll say things like, I'm going to float to take it away later, because that's something I thought in 2006. And that's how everyone spoke about poker before I took a big hiatus. And I'm like, yeah, man, well, that definitely checks out, because there is stuff that I do today because I got into a habit of forming that neural pathway like a decade ago. And it might be like a completely silly thing where every time I take this specific mug out of the cupboard, I think about a thought I had once when I had this blue mug in my hand. It could be like some associative thing like that. And it just shows you that a lot of our habits are totally random, and they just happen to be ditches that get dug, and then they get redug and redug even more, because that's where the neurons are going. And sometimes we just have to say, oh yeah, see that thing that I do every single time I'm in this situation? That's bullshit. That's wrong. And once we see that, we actually like pave the way for new neural pathways to be formed. But we can't do that until we acknowledge that the thing we always do is problematic.
Yeah, there's definitely those things, triggers for me. Not so much like, oh, this is how I talked about it back in the day, but there's like a bias I sometimes have toward like wanting to be able to like have an easy solution. So, you know, I see a flop and I think, you know, nut advantage, right? I can go big. It's like B75 nut advantage.
Yeah.
And it's like that trigger of like just automatically B75ing because there's a perceived nut advantage is like super insufficient in itself.
Oh yeah.
And that is when I'm running bad, or I feel like I have that aggression bias, like what can sometimes be gasoline for that is a kind of perceived nut advantage. And like in a multi, especially like in a multi-way pot where, you know, it's likely whatever nut advantage there exists is likely diluted to some degree. And so the trigger, if you will, or like that way of thinking about something like so routinely, where it's like, okay, this is, you see this and you do this, you see X and you do Y, is another piece of this tilt that affects me, that I've become a lot better. I will say I've become a lot better at, where I'm like I hate, the other part of this is like, I hate to take a passive line where I feel like the aggressive line is like much better. And that I have like such an aversion to passive play, and just have such an aversion to it. I always have. And so when I feel like I'm playing passively, or I'm over checking, if you will, or whatever, I become like, I have this like, get this like bad taste in my mouth. Like it's something I don't want to do. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this here. I have a nut advantage. And it's like, no, you don't really have a nut advantage.
And even if your range has a nut advantage, what the hell does that have to do with whether it's better to better check your actual hand against a sexual villain?
Right.
You know,
exactly.
I see people say this all the time. Like,
or villains.
Yeah, I was uncapped and I had all the sets in my range, so I potted the turn at SBR 1.5 with nothing. It's like, okay, so how do you rate your fold equity here? Oh yeah, pretty terrible. It's like, okay, so you just burned a load of money then. And you're right, you do have a nut advantage. Congratulations. You know, it's like the most ridiculous thing. So yeah, I think what we're doing is here, we're beginning to expose the inner workings of the monkey brain. We're beginning to say, I can see what you're doing to me now. These are the things that are going on. And next time, I may actually catch you in the act and stop you. And here's a thought as well. What if you have to make one bad passive play to fix 9 aggressive plays that are bad? Isn't it better to avoid 9 bad aggressive plays while making 1 bad passive play than it is to, you know, do the opposite, where the medicine is at that point much worse than the disease?
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think looking at it through that kind of lens is really helpful and quite satisfying to say, you know, what am I improving by doing something I don't like right now? It's like getting up and going to the gym. It's like, God, I don't want to do this, but I know if I do this, it's going to make the next time I do it easier. And then eventually, like, I'm going to be, you know, a lot healthier, and I'm going to feel better. I'm going to have more energy and all these great things, but I have to do the hard work now. And that I'm always willing to do the hard work when it comes to studying, when it comes to grinding, when it
Yep.
comes to all of those things that are like the traditional hard work.
Mhm.
But sometimes the hard work I don't want to do is take the passive line when I feel like I could take the aggressive line.
Okay.
And like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So how about this then? Right now, today, 31st of October, Halloween 2023, you are faced with the decision to take the aggressive line and go to the card room, or the passive line and not. And you don't want to take the passive line. It's a similar thing where that feels bad to you, it feels
Yeah.
wrong to you. But I think this is so analogous to the way you are as a poker player. And I would say to you that I'm really confident that you will never be someone who makes more passivity errors than aggression errors. I don't think that will ever be you, no matter how far you swing. I don't think that's possible. And in life, I think it's also, I don't know you as well in life as I do in poker, but I think it's highly unlikely that you're the kind of person that will end up shying away from challenges because you take 2 days, or will like go too far in that direction either. Just as you won't become like too passive of a poker player, I don't think you'll ever become too confrontation adverse a person. I'd say it's very similar.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. I think that's right.
Cool. Well, let's leave
Yeah.
it there. I think this is hopefully going to be useful to the audience as well. And thank you, Melissa, for like being so open and honest today about your own personal experiences, because a lot of people wouldn't feel cool about coming on a podcast. I know this is your podcast, so maybe it's easier, but talking in front of loads of people about something that's like quite unpleasant, you know, traumatic in the poker sense, as much as poker really can be, in the short term at least, where it's probably not a great thing to talk about. It's probably not the most pleasant thing to talk about in this context. So yeah, definitely thank you for sharing it all with us. I'm sure the audience will be grateful as well for you sort of showing what you're going through here.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to have this, this podcast. It's a really important part of my of my poker game, and my development of all that other stuff. And I love to talk about poker, and I love to think about poker, and I don't always get to do it in person with people. So this is a really great outlet. And yeah, I used to be more concerned about like, because there's a lot of people that listen to this that I play with in my pool.
Mm.
And I used to be more concerned with, oh, how is this going to come across to someone that
Mm-hmm.
I play with? And I've given up caring about any
It's
of
the
that.
right way to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like I would like to stop doing Pete versus Troll as well, because I'm just so bored of Pete versus Troll,
Yeah.
and I'm so bored of trolls, because it's just the same. Not saying the people you play with are trolls, by the way. I'm sure they're lovely and they're not those same people.
The exact
But
opposite of trolls.
right, but it still comes down
Yeah.
to like caring what people think or not.
Right.
And I think that like if anything, the comment section and just the kind of vitriol and the brain dead sort of absolutely generic samey nature to all of those troll comments. Like I think we did like a few episodes of it. It was just the same fucking troll comment like every time. I think it's the same dude just
Yeah.
in his basement, like just sat down there in the dark writing the same thing in multiple accounts, man. The trolls are boring, and it doesn't do you any favors to read comments and get into that social media trap where you're like really caring what people think. I think like we thrive more when we're just doing our own thing, because like 95 to no more than that, let's say 99% of the people listening to Poker Distilled right now are just enjoying the realness of this, and are just enjoying the raw nature of this discussion and how fucking real it is, right? Because there's a lot of bullshit in poker. There's a lot of like, oh yeah, you just get back on the horse, you just be tough, well, you got to man up. Like there's a lot of this bullshit, but everybody suffers at some point in poker. There's nobody that hasn't had a really bad week or a really bad month or bad year or bad day in poker. So yeah, who cares what people think? Like, be real. And I think you'll heal a lot more by being totally open and honest about it than you will by pretending that it doesn't phase you and jumping back into the mix and saying I should be fine, I should just not let this affect me at all. It's better to be honest and say that yeah, it's a wound and let's treat the wound, and then we get back to it, right? We're not saying like let's run away, we're just going to treat the wound, and then I'm sure by next week you will be ready to flip the tables on me, because we are going to do a Pete Returns to Poker special podcast. We're going to talk about all of the thinking that I've been doing about actually playing volume again, and about the fact that my game is suddenly out the woods. It's like way, way better than it's been for so long, and I didn't quite realize how much making the carrot poker school and spending so much of my days on theory fucked up my ability to actually play poker. And now I'm kind of able to get back in touch with that intuitive side that used to serve me so well, that hand reading creative side. So I'd love to talk to you a bit about that next week, Melissa, when we do the Pete returns to poker, or returns to the grind, as it were, segment.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that. And I'm also really happy to learn that you're returned to the grind. I think it's gonna be great. I look forward to discussing.
Yeah, 2024 is the year where we hopefully start playing a lot more than we have in recent years. And yeah, we'll say more about that next week. Okay, guys, you know where to find us on Spotify. Please do leave us a rating. 5 stars would be very much appreciated. Leave us some comments, likes on YouTube as well. It really helps. And yeah, that's all I've got. We'll see you back here, same time next week.
Bye-bye.
See you later, guys.